It's drop kicks and denture powder. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome back, Coxsackie, New York. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I grew up near there, and I was happy to see it on my list of people listening to the show. Anyway, this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I'm Bob Smith, formerly with PWI, and this is part 2 of our interview segments with the great Cary Silkin, formerly owner of Ring of Honor, and he's done a million other things in wrestling. And I'm just going to let this one roll because I'll tell you what, the last conversation was so good. And the only reason we ended it is we were just having some technical problems. Well, now nothing like that occurred. And you're going to hear this one from soup to nuts. It's another great, joyous time between Cary and myself. He's got a lot to say, and this is a good one. I really enjoyed doing this one. So enough of my yak, and I'm going to get right to it. Right after this quick timeout. Stay tuned, will you?
Ladies and gentlemen, Wrestling Fans International Association is back. That's right, the premier fan club association of the 1970s and 1980s has been revived and is back in business. Join today. It's free at thewfia.org. That's thewfia.org. You can also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969.
Folks, you all asked for it. Here's part 2 with Cary Silkin. Welcome back.
Bob, my man, thank you very much.
Hey, listen, this has been a real honor and privilege for me, and I'm glad to have you back. We won't take up too much of your time, but I've got a few more questions for you, and our audience wanted to hear more, so here you are, and I'm glad you could come back.
My pleasure. I apologize for the thousands and hundreds of thousands of listeners that my technical difficulties a little blip.
But you're about the God's ear, man. Holy smokes.
Yeah. Well, you never know.
Hey,
a lot of people know you, and it's like anything else. I learned this from my podcast. You know, regardless if it's 10 people, 100 people, whatever, 1,000 people, you do it because you want to do it. And there's always someone that wants to hear it.
I agree. And the amazing thing about this thing, I barely promote it, right? I promote it basically on Facebook and a couple other spots. I sent out a couple of press releases when I had a couple of high profile guests, and we cracked top 40, I think 4 times so far. And to me, that's phenomenal because there's like 900 wrestling podcasts.
I was just going to see, like Meatloaf said, or the guy that wrote for him said, you took the words right out of my mouth. There's so many wrestling podcasts.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
You know, besides the name ones, the Carnets, and, you know, all the ones that Conrad Thompson's involved with, there's a million other ones. So why not guys like you and me make it 1,000,001?
Right. Well, my philosophy has been this. I had a favorite musician years ago who kind of turned down big gigs and joining other bands and stuff like that because he wanted to do things his way, and he was great. He's my idol, and it's like I'm doing this my way. There's a little comedy at the beginning of the show. There's a little music in the show on occasion.
You're going to leave me hanging and not tell me this name?
Of what? The musician? Oh, you never heard of him. My good friend Glenn Brigay from Canada knows who he is. His name is Dominic Triano. He's a guitar player.
Okay.
If you're an old rock and roller, he was the guy who replaced both Joe Walsh in the James Gang
Yeah.
And he replaced Randy Bachman eventually in the Guess Who.
Well, I don't know Dominic. Like, I would be lying, but I certainly know the James Gang. I saw them in Central Park, and of course, Bachman Turner Overdrive. So obviously, this is a quality guy.
Oh, he could play. He was everything from progressive rock to jazz to soul to blues to R&B, and I thought he was fantastic. And they loved him in Canada. They put him in the Music Hall of Fame there, but nobody knows him here. He stepped into bands and people didn't want to hear it. The James Gang fans wanted Joe Walsh, and for good reason. And the Tommy Bolin joined them later on, and they were great, but people wanted the James Gang with Joe Walsh. You can't follow up a legendary guy like that. You just can't do it, no matter who you are.
The wrestling fans that listen to this are going to have to listen to you and I for a minute sharing these stories. But my dad, who was a bartender, he owned a tavern. It was in Newark, the riots, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, in the late 60s into the 80s, he worked at this really cool, no one would know the name. There was a little club in Roselle, New Jersey called The Cove. And there was a jazz. The point is that there was a jazz band there, and it was the Morris Nanton Trio. Well, no one knows that name either. And Morris was a piano player, was piano, bass, and drums. And Morris could have been Duke, whatever, fill in the blank. But he liked his little gig. He was a music teacher, and he didn't want to go on the road. And I get the picture with what you were saying about your main man.
I have known some fantastic musicians who never left home, but I knew how good they were, and I would go see them or invite them into my band even because I was on the road for years.
I didn't know that.
Yes, under the stage name of Robert Charles. I was a blues singer, and I had albums produced by greats like Duke Robillard, who you wouldn't know unless you're a blues guy. But I was on the road for 15 years, and you never know. I'm telling you, here's another little story for you. I went to New Orleans once, and I was killing some time. And I went into a sandwich shop to get a po' boy. And if you know anything about New Orleans, every venue has a stage on it, right? Have you noticed that? And this Zydeco band came out while I'm chomping away on my grilled chicken po' boy, and they were the greatest band I've ever heard. You know what I'm saying? It's like you never know what you're going to step into when it comes to music, right?
And by the way, if you're killing time in New Orleans, if you're not careful, New Orleans could kill you.
Oh, no kidding. No, I was careful in New Orleans. I was shocked. I've only been in New Orleans once, and I was shocked at what I saw. Kind of delighted, but shocked nonetheless. You know what I'm saying? It's like, wow.
It's what I would refer to as a slippery city. Sort of like Las Vegas. I tell some of my younger friends that might be making their first trip to Vegas or New Orleans, I warn them, no matter what you said you would never do, no matter what, you're not going to be walking down the street in a red sequin dress. You never know if you're in New Orleans or Vegas. But well, that's really cool. I had no idea of your career in music. And
and just like my wrestling career, all the music I did, I stopped in 2009. Yeah, and it's all still out there. People still know me from that too. So I've had 2 or 3 different careers, man. Everything is weird in my life. But anyway,
maybe we'll both make a late comeback in our careers.
The outdated blues artist, yeah.
You're doing it is much better than me. I am certainly not going to be starting a new wrestling promotion.
Oh, let's get back. Now that you segued, nicely done. We will go back into wrestling now. At the end of our last appearance, you were talking about Tony Khan before we had our little technical difficulty.
Yes,
now I'll bring up today's Ring of Honor. Do you keep up with that out of old time's sake? Are you into it? What's your reaction to the current Ring of Honor?
I do keep up with it. As a matter of fact, I watched the pay-per-view Friday night. They had the big closing show of the year for Ring of Honor in my tenure, and including the Sinclair tenure, was Final Battle. That was the last show of the year in December. And we used to have it at the Hammerstein or the Manhattan Center.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. Tony Khan's kept the name alive, and I'm glad that the name is still out there. Well, Friday night was Final Battle, and I watched it. The Ring of Honor as we knew it. I mean, at the most, even with the Sinclair era, we really only did like 40 or 50 live shows a year. Sinclair had their weekly television. I had a little television with HDNet with Mark Cuban, but we weren't, on national cable TV. And the current Ring of Honor is Ring of Honor in name. The wrestling is still good, but part of going to Ring of Honor, let them say, oh, well, it's Cary talking because he was involved. There was a community. There was we're all in this together kind of feel with the wrestlers, the fans. And it was, it's like similar to, you're a blues and jazz guy. It's like our little thing, and so the current Ring of Honor is, it's sort of in name only. And I've met Tony Khan. I was at the first Ring of Honor Tony Khan production when they sold it. But I think that he wants to, until he gets it on a regular television slot. Like, let's just say it was in the Friday night, what is that show? Rampage?
Right.
If it get, it'll be out there more. But, the current Ring of Honor, God bless them. I can't name the champions because it's very the way it's being presented now is sort of fractured. I don't want to knock it, because, but I think Tony Khan is planning to try to get a TV spot, but nothing's what it used to be.
I think when he bought it, he should have. AEW is on 3 times a week. It's my feeble opinion that one of those spots should have gone to Ring of Honor. That's a lot of time on TV, and it would offer a secondary flavor in addition to AEW. That's just my opinion.
I think your opinion is dead on, and ROH, even in its weakest moments, it was known, and you mentioned this last time we spoke. It was known for, the last bastion of some real good pro wrestling. And maybe when it finds its way, Ring of Honor, the current one, if you subscribe to the Honor Club, there's a 1 hour a week TV show. It's not available like on cable. But so Friday night, I watched the Final Battle show from Texas, and it was a good show, but they had to bring in to get some, and they announced these matches really late. Point is, they brought in, and you'll be very familiar with these names, the FTR guys. They teamed them up those two up with Mark Briscoe. It was a tribute to, God bless him, Jay Briscoe. And they wrestled against Bryan Danielson, Claudio Castagnoli, and Jon Moxley. I have no problem with it. It's their company. The problem is none of these people are on the Ring of Honor show that is being presented online right now. But they needed a draw. They needed some name value, and they did a. If you want to see some blood and guts mixed with Cirque du Soleil, they gave it to you. So yeah,
ouch.
right.
That's the closest thing you've done to a criticism, which I give you credit for that. And you know what? I know I'm an old fogey, and I know I like what I like, and it's usually the old stuff. But again, I can't criticize today's kids or younger fans for watching any of the current product because this is what they have, right? They're not going to sit down and watch YouTube and look at an old match between Spaceman Frank Hickey and Frank Williams because it's not their thing.
No.
The whole style has changed over the decades of professional wrestling. It's gotten more athletic. And I understand all of this. I am not going to besmirch anybody for enjoying AEW or anything else that they like. All I can do is offer, constructive criticism once in a while. But I'm not going to bash anybody. There's too much bash. I was talking online earlier today. AEW fans bash WWF fans. WWF fans bash AEW. Podcasters bash each other. It's just going on and on. And you know what? I'm getting a little tired of it. I'm tired of all the rancor and all the vitriol. I just think we all love wrestling. We all love what we like. And that's it. I mean, this is our leisure time. This stuff's supposed to be fun, isn't it?
Absolutely. And boy, you said you sound like an old fogey or whatever you said. I mean, I'm going to sound even worse. But you and I were brought up not boys and girls. If any boys or girls, not only were we brought up pre-internet, we were brought up pre-cable TV.
Right.
So news traveled slowly. Mm-hmm. Thus, Bob Smith, as one of the editors or the editor at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, even in 1988, it was very special to get these magazines and find out, there was a title change. Oh, so-and-so has moved from a territory. And it's an era of instant gratification. And I guess, Bob, if we were, 30 years younger, 40 years younger, it's all we would know. But we were lucky. I'll speak for myself. I would like to be, a young man. But I don't know if I would. I'm glad I grew up when I did. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. I feel the same way. I really do. But, on our last show, we talked about Bruno Sammartino. You had a nice remembrances of him. At his Hall of Fame ceremony for the WWE Hall of Fame, he insisted that it was the wrestling magazines that let him be known in other countries and other territories. People knew who he was through the magazines. He made a big point about how important the magazines were. And to me, that justified everything I ever did. Well, because it's really true. I mean, there was a time when the wrestling magazines were the number one source for news about stuff he didn't know.
You don't need the justification. It's the truth. And it's the way it was. I mean, I remember seeing a magazine. I'm going to go back in the 70s, like Dusty Rhodes, new NWA champion. Well, that was the only way I was going to get this information.
Right.
It was special.
Mm-hmm.
So, to your original point about these people are fighting online, and there's a hubbub. They're bashing Triple H. They're bashing CM Punk. They're bashing Tony Khan. They're bashing Jim Cornette. They're bashing. It's like I remember Dutch Mantel trying to explain you'll understand. It's like Dutch Mantel trying to explain what a good angle is about. It's like, he goes, Cary, here's the point. Why? He goes, if you see two guys on the side of the road and they're out and they're ready to fight, you think, why are they fighting? So it's always the same thing here. Why, what's so, Bob, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?
But back to all this too. Another difference between then and now that I think is really harmful is you can't keep a secret. If you have somebody special coming up on your pay-per-view or appearing on your television show, people know about it before they walk in, and you see signs carried by the fans who knew that the special surprise was coming. Ooh, I hate that. You can't fool anybody. You can't surprise them anymore if they already know it's going to happen before it happens.
I'm going to tell a story I may have never told before. In 2000, in June of 2000, maybe it was May, 2011, when the Sinclair Cary Silkin deal was down, we actually kept it a secret between Jim Cornette, Gary Juster, myself, and Joe Koff. And we were having a show in Chicago, an ROH show, and people knew what there was something, I'm going to make these old rock references, that Buffalo Springfield song, something's happening around here. Stop there, what, right? So when we did the meeting with the talent to introduce Joe Koff from Sinclair, I made everybody, I go, put your phones on the table here. Because if there were 30 guys in the room, I was just afraid one of them was going to text whomever, Dave Meltzer, right? And guess what? It was a secret for about 20 minutes. And the word got out, and it's pathetic, but that's just the way it is. I mean, when Punk came back recently,
right,
they sort of kept that quiet, right?
Yeah, I think they did handle that quite well. Right. I don't think anybody expected it. It was the end of the show, and if you notice in the corner, they already had the goodbye sticker on that said copyright, whatever, WWWF World Wrestling Entertainment. That had already been shown, and then all of a sudden the music hit. And the fans went ape. So obviously they didn't know he was going to be there, and that's why it worked.
Right, and that was very unique. But you and I can talk for hours, days, and weeks, and we're not going to change anything. So
no, it's fine. It's fine.
Do we live in this, or do we? Are we the two old men arguing about it?
Well, I'm going to battle this. I have a guest coming up on a future show. Her name is Kimmy Sokol. She works in the wrestling business. She does a little podcasting. She knows everybody. And I guess she's about 20 years old. So I finally get to merge my old sensibility with her fresh take on what's really going on right now. And I think it's going to be a fantastic show. And she's a great personality. So I'm looking forward to that one.
What's her?
Because it's like I need to be walked off the ledge sometimes. I there are times when I'll be watching a show and I go, "Am I shutting this off, or am I going to watch this?" I just sometimes I find stuff that's distasteful. Sometimes I find stuff it's. For instance, on AEW, the wrestlers come out and they're flipping the bird. I'm like, why? It's cheap heat. You don't really need to do it. It's just, why offend someone out there if you don't have to?
Well, before I came on with you earlier today, I listened back to our part one in fear of repeating, Cary repeating himself, which I tend to do. And we were talking about the AEW incident with the blood in the mouth.
Right.
Now, I'm going to challenge you here.
Okay.
What was different between, and I agree, that was, no, No, and I know Adam, whatever. But what was different between that and what we would see with Abdullah the Butcher and the Sheik?
This is a good question. The difference is, in my mind's eye, we're more educated to the danger of doing something like that now, whereas in the 70s and 80s, they would just blade and, it was a secret. People didn't know people were blading back then. And there weren't as many blood diseases then as there are now. There's hepatitis, there's AIDS, there's other things you could catch from doing something that daring,
Right.
And I hope there's no repercussions from it health wise. Other than that, to be honest with you, I never saw anything like that before anywhere, and I didn't think I could be shocked anymore. But that was about 10 steps over the top. It really was.
That was unique. Going back to I mentioned the ROH pay-per-view, the final battle the other night, and I've met FTR. They're good guys. I know Mark Briscoe for 20 years. Brian Danielson was my trainer at the school. He was with me for years. Claudio, one of the nicest people in the world. John Moxley, I don't know him. I've met him. He had one ROH dark match. What bothered me, and I guess you haven't seen that match yet. I can just tell.
No.
Oh, people that want clickbait. They could get some click. It bothered me to see Brian Danielson and Claudio rolling around in thumbtacks and barbed wires. Now, Brian would have blood. You were probably at some shows at the Hammerstein. He liked a little blood now and then, but he wasn't, in that super hardcore combat zone, ECW. And it just bothered me to see these guys doing it. I mean, look, they're well paid, and it was a tribute to Jay Briscoe. But I know deep down that Claudio does not want to be rolling around in barbed wire. I know it, and if he gets upset, whoever wants to say, oh, Cary complained about that, go ahead. Because it's not the kind of wrestling that he or Brian want to do. Was the match good? Yes, if you like that kind of action, and it was more than barbed wire and thumbtacks. But at a certain point, what are you going to do next?
Right. And you know what? You bring up a good point about, there are some indie federations around the country that are run by people who have absolutely no history in the wrestling industry. Small ones in little towns down south, up east Canada, and they're deathmatch federations and hardcore federations, and they do stuff that made what you just described look mild.
Yes.
I cannot believe in my wildest dreams that somewhere there's a VFW hall that would allow stuff like that, or a state athletic commission who would look the other way while it's going on. You know what I'm saying? Because it was different when you and I were really into it. And now it's almost like anything goes, and I am afraid. And I've discussed this on the show with other guests. I am afraid that somebody's going to get really hurt. And it's going to be like national headlines. Really hurt.
Yes, and going back, and I'm going to be a walking contradiction because I allowed blood, but the whole thing with diseases and it's like at this stage, I'm the one. I do like a little blood in my wrestling.
Yeah, of course you do.
Please don't bleed in the other guy's mouth.
Yeah, right. No, look, blood has been part of this. I'm not against blood at all. I just, we all know the risks of it now. Bruno bled, yeah.
Like some blood in his matches.
Sure. Everybody did.
It worked.
Right. You know what made blood special That's actually the word. It was special. It wasn't in every match on a card. It wasn't on every card. You would see it sparingly. You use it as a psychology. There was a psychology to blood in a match. Oh my gosh, he's hurting him.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely. And I remember being at the Garden or being at wherever. I mean, this is way before Ring of Honor. I'm talking about the 70s and 80s. And if I had a friend with me, we'd be like, and I mean, you went to a lot of WWWF in the Albany area, right?
Right. Yeah. A ton of it.
If there was some blood, it was special. And it was exciting.
There's a match. Let me make a little quick point. I remember a match between Ivan Koloff and Ivan Putski. And Koloff whips out some little jagged piece of wood or something and busts open. And that was a serious good guy crowd in Albany. Like there's stories about Baron Scicluna's car being set on fire and other stuff like that. They were a serious upstate, rural. They didn't like bad guys at all. They hated bad guys. And I'll tell you what, that place, when they busted open Ivan Putski, I thought there's going to be an RIOT. It was like they were so livid. And that was the difference between then and now, because it was like fans didn't want to see people get hurt in the old days. Now it's like if there isn't like blood in every third match, it's like a boring show. Boo, headlock,
And you know what? You mentioned Putski. Can I talk about him for a second?
Sure.
He wasn't my cup of tea, but the fans believed in him.
Right.
So even if you went to a high school show, which I would, or let alone an arena show anywhere in the Northeast, I'm just talking about his WWWF era, the people loved him. The people loved Jay Strongbow.
Oh my gosh, they did.
Guys barely did anything.
Mm-hmm.
But and on the other side of it was the Valiant brothers. They did very little. I'm going, but the people hated them.
Right.
And not to mention, I'm going 70s here. Spiros Arion and Bruno, and holy shit! But Putski, and you could watch it on YouTube or the Peacock thing. But there's a match with Putski and superstar Billy Graham.
I was thinking the same thing.
And man, if anyone thinks that Putski couldn't work and put on a good match, well, watch that.
Yes.
Because that was fabulous.
And the heat was off the charts, right?
God. And Billy Graham was so good. I'm gonna when we're done, I'm gonna go watch it to make sure that my brain isn't totally out of whack. But there's a spot in that match where Putski gives the double sledgehammer.
Right.
Like Billy Graham's beating him up, heat. And when Putski makes his comeback, which is basically pushing him, Graham goes into the rope and he gives him the Polish hammer or whatever. Wasn't the finish.
Right.
The place erupts.
Yes, like crazy. I'll tell you what, that may be one of the most, on tape anyway, one of the most amazingly appreciated moves I've ever seen at the Garden. And that includes the Bruno matches, right? You saw it. It's like the place becomes unglued when he gives him that double sledge. You're absolutely right.
Another good one. It was really nice to have Billy Graham as because that was the only time he was the WWF had a heel champion for an extended period of time. Mm-hmm. And you watch the matches with Billy Graham and Dusty Rhodes. Same thing. They have that bull rope match. And you know what? Even moving ahead, more towards your time at PWI. Say what you want about Hulk Hogan. Say what you want about the Ultimate Warrior. These people loved them.
Yes, they did.
They loved them. And a Hulk Hogan entrance and it's funny, the guys that wrestled with me, guys like Jay Lethal, guys like Delirious, guys like Bryan Danielson, they all were Ultimate Warrior fans. I'm like, what? Because it was just the energy was special. And as we're swinging down memory lane here, let's not forget Sergeant Slaughter.
Right.
I mean, it was very special. Sergeant Slaughter and the Iron Sheik. I mean, these were some great matches.
Yes.
And they took their time. Open up the show with Sylvana Souza against Tony Altamore.
Right.
Have Manuel Soto against Johnny Roz. And I remember I referenced my cousin Mike, who was the guy that worked at Sterling McFadden. When we would go to these shows at the Garden, whether it was the 70s or the 80s or whatever, it was like an inside joke. There was never anything better than the opening bout. Right? The house lights would go dark, those ring lights would come on, and regardless of who walked out to the ring, Jose Luis Rivera or whomever, it was just special.
It was special. And in those days, fans didn't boo draws either.
No.
You could have a 20-minute opener of a draw between two evenly matched undercard guys, and the fans loved it. They didn't care. In fact, Madison Square Garden was so wrestling happy that, you remember the curfew?
Of course.
Nobody even got upset.
No.
Right? Because they knew the rules. They said, well, at 11 o'clock, they got to call for the bell, and they did. And then fans just went, oh, well, you never see that today.
Now, when you went, let me interview you for a minute.
Okay.
Where did you see most of your WWF action as a young man?
As a young man, from high school on until my earliest, I'd say early 80s, I saw it at a place called the Washington Avenue Armory in Albany.
Okay.
I'm from the Capital District originally. And they would have, the promoter's name was Ted Bailey, and I think he promoted for a while the old Pedro Martinez NWF with Johnny Powers and Eric Duran and Kurt Von Hess.
You're talking to a man who knows about that.
Right. I'm sure you do. But in 1972, that show went off, WRGB Channel 6 in Schenectady, and a few weeks later, here's the WWF in the same time slot. And all of a sudden, it's Bulldog Brower and Pedro Morales and Victor Rivera and Tony Gurria and Chief Jay Strongbow, who, by the way, I insist, I'm so tired of hearing people badmouth Chief Jay. 72 to 74, he was it, man. He was so over, you can't even calculate it. He was number 2 to Bruno. There's no question about that.
No question.
Or it's Pedro at that point, excuse me. But I am telling you, people went ape for Chief Jay Strongbow. They loved him. And he was great at that role. He was fantastic at that role. He would come out and give, well, I'm going to do my best, until you angered him or busted him open on TV, and he would turn into a wild man. He was real good at what he did.
He was also the perfect guy that would take the fall leading up to if you turned on Chief Jay Strongbow, it was rotten. And there were those great matches. Now you're going to be testing my old brain here, but him and Peter Maivia,
right,
and a number of feuds, and Strongbow. Yeah, people If there's any young people that listen to the Outdated Wrestling podcast, go back and watch these. Turn off your brain and turn off your phone and watch, and I've shown these matches to a lot of young wrestlers. Just take a look at this. Like you want to hear a crowd pop, like there's like nothing going on, and like one throw into the ropes and a backdrop, and the place explodes.
Mm-hmm.
But time has marched on.
Yes, it has. It really has. I always look at. Maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't. I always look at the build up to the Bruno Sammartino Larry Zbyszko feud as absolute perfection. Especially in the East Coast where they didn't do stuff like this a lot. Long storyline. It was perfection.
And you're dead on, because the East Coast WWWF, they didn't have a lot of angles. I was blessed to have, between my compulsion for the wrestling magazines and getting to see championship wrestling from Florida on UHF, and getting to see the Los Angeles, and then eventually the cable, I would see these other federations, and there would be these angles and unmaskings, and just and I knew I wasn't stupid. I knew that the WWF did things at a very slow
pace.
Mm-hmm. But you know what, Bob? It worked.
It did work. And I'll tell you what, people, you show some younger people that, and they go, oh, it's just a bunch of squash matches. Yeah, but there was a philosophy behind the squash matches. That is how a newcomer in the territory built his way up into championship contendership, right? It was a different mindset. You couldn't just show up and go, hey, I want a match against you. You had to earn it.
And it was also to get you to buy tickets.
Right.
To go see Strongbow against whomever, and that's the way it was. I love watching these old all-star wrestlings.
Oh yeah.
Exist. And if looking at it in in our eyes, there's a romance of it's what we grew up with, but it's just still good. And the people accepted it and were happy with it. And it was a special time, my man.
Here's how special it was to me. When I was with PWI, I used to go cover in Pennsylvania Mario Zavoldi's federation, right? That little offshoot thing he did once he left the WWE. Now, he let me do some color commentary, which for reasons I don't even know how I ended up doing. I just ended up doing it because I was there to shoot photos for the magazines and write and all that other stuff. But at one point, he goes to me, Mario walks up to me and goes, I'd like you to interview Joe. I said, who, Jumpin' Joe Savoldi? No, this Joe McHugh.
Oh, wow.
He said he's never been interviewed on TV his entire life. Would you like to interview him? I said, would I like to interview him? Are you kidding me? To me, he's like a legend. He was like the voice I grew up listening to every week. One of my great moments of wrestling. I'm telling you right now.
How did that go?
It was great. He's a crusty old coot. He was like, well, he did a laundry list of the people. He actually introduced people like Muhammad Ali and religious leaders. He was an announcer and host,
I think,
or MC, I should say, for all kinds of things in the Pennsylvania area for decades.
I think he was on the radio also.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like he just was born in Hamburg, Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But you would think that. But yeah, Joe. Yeah. My name is Joe McHugh. I go back at the Garden. They used to have a guy, Friendly Bob Freed.
Oh my gosh. I have one on one of my podcasts, without doing him by name because I don't want to insult anybody.
Yeah.
I did an imitation of him, as he was
Really?
friendly Bob would mispronounce my name.
How's that? Keep going.
Oh, he used to mispronounce all kinds of wrestler names, man. You remember Bob Freed, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's like ask him to introduce Baron Mikhail Cicluna or anything that's like kind of complicated like that. Dominic DiNucci. I heard him mangle so many different names over the years. It was even funny, but everybody loved him. I guess, or as John Izzy once said, because he was friendly.
For you. And I mentioned I want to go watch that. I'll go on YouTube with that Putski match.
Right.
On YouTube, there's a match. I'm going to pull out, but talk about pulling a name. I don't know how this guy ever got work, but there was a jobber enhancement talent, Lee Wong.
Lee Wong.
And Lee Wong has an opening match. It's on the network. It's on YouTube. And Bob Freed, he does, welcome to a night of wrestling at Madison Square Garden. The commissioner, the doctor, blah, blah, blah. So then he introduces, he goes, first from Chinatown, Lee Wong. All right, but that wasn't the mess up.
Right.
It was against Blackjack Lanza.
Right.
Bob Freed, and I'm not making this up. You can challenge me. Go watch it. Blackjack Lazanza.
Yeah.
But yeah. And the funny thing was, my Uncle Henry, you know that movie Broadway Danny Rose?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Woody Allen. Yeah.
Right. That was my Uncle Henry. He was like a third-rate publicist. Somehow he knew Bob Freed.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Freed was, I don't know, he too was probably on the radio. But somehow he worked his way into the McMahon family, and Vince Sr. was a loyal guy.
Yes, he was.
So a guy like Bob Freed, he had a gig for many years.
Yes, he did. He was at the Garden for a long time. And Washington, too.
There was character to this.
Yes, there was. Yeah, there was. The old man ring announcers, even in Albany when I went, there's always an old man in an ill-fitting suit or tuxedo every time. Every time. It was like, and it was just part of the flavor, I always fashioned that they worked for the athletic commission or something like that in my mind's eye. Like, oh, he must be a deputy with the athletic. And sometimes they were. Sometimes the referees were,
Well, they were. There was a referee, Billy Caputo,
right,
who later worked for the athletic commission. And I dealt with him at Ring of Honor. And, you know this, but let's tell the boys and girls. The New York State Athletic Commission, they were there just to have their hand out to pay for this, pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
And we always would hope that Billy Caputo was our representative on a particular night, because Billy Caputo was brought up in the wrestling business. And he told me that his very first, I forget the circumstances, but he was doing something for someone in Staten Island. He might have been a maintenance guy or a plumber at this building, and they were having a wrestling show. And he knew TV wrestling, but he wasn't a big fan. He had the opportunity. They said, we need a referee tonight. He goes, I don't know how to. He goes, you could do it. And, I think it was Arnold Scullin or Tony Altamori was the agent that night.
Mm-hmm.
And Billy Caputo told me, I got in the ring. The first match was, let's just say it was Johnny Roz against Pete Sanchez.
Okay.
And they just told me, I said, well, what did you do? He goes, they told me Arnold's, Johnny's going to win. He goes, yeah, but what? You could just do it. And he says, so I did it. And he's on a lot of those old Garden tapes. Remember, I don't know about in Albany, but remember in New York how the referees had the gray shirts on?
Yes, yeah.
That which it's, as opposed to the classic
stripes.
Stripes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. They'd have those gray shirts.
Which I found strange. But yeah, it was a magic time. I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to go really off base here.
Okay.
You're also a roller derby fan.
First of all, I will let you know in my later years, when I was with the wrestling magazines, I worked for 2 different roller games magazines.
Really?
London put one out for a while with the Revival around 91, a really bad show. That was terrible. And then Colin Bowman, then they revived it again. I think it was on TNN or something like that. And Colin Bowman got rights to do it. It only lasted a few issues, and I worked on that too.
Okay.
So yes, I enjoyed roller derby. I remember seeing it. There was roller derby, and there was also something called roller games. Bill Griffiths was roller games, I believe.
Right. You had the San Francisco Bay Bombers was the perennial home team in roller derby, and the LA T-Birds. Right. But yeah, it's really. I apologize if I'm going off.
No, dude, I love this kind of thing. Just keep going. You're doing fine. I like free-form conversation more than anything, and that's why I listen to other podcasts. So say whatever you like.
We would go to the roller derby. They used to have matinees in 73, 70. At the same time, I'm going to Led Zeppelin on Saturday night. I'm going to roller derby on Sunday afternoon. And it died out. Yes, there were revivals. Yes, there were these companies that opened that you were involved in, but the original roller derby / roller games, there was some really, really good action. And I would love to know the real story of what the hell happened. Because they were at a point when they did like 40,000 people at Comiskey Park or the Oakland Coliseum, and they might have even done Shea Stadium. But in the 70s, and probably they came up in your neck of the woods.
They were in our neck of the woods too, absolutely.
Chiefs.
But here's something about wrestling and roller derby that I bet I'm the only guy on the planet who will make this comment. At the end of old WWF shows, it was directed by Guy Galante.
Okay.
Now,
I might be the only guy in the world that knows the name.
Okay, now let me make this point. After a while, they put roller games on with Bill Griffiths and all the all this usual. That also was directed by Guy Galante.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I'm one of the few people who remember that. I am trying to get to the bottom of Guy Galante. I don't know anybody who remembers him, who knew him. I knew he was an award-winning TV director in a different type of television. Who's Guy Galante? Nobody ever talks about him.
I've recently joined a couple, it's funny or it's interesting. On Facebook and social media, there's a million things, thank God, about old wrestling, Mid-Atlantic, Florida, WWWF, so on and so forth. There's very little about roller derby, but there's a few.
Right.
There's a few, and I really would like, unfortunately, most of the people have passed away. Mm-hmm. But remember the great Charlie O'Connell?
Charlie O'Connell, yeah.
He was a New York guy, and I mean he was from I think Queens and or Brooklyn, and Mike Gammon, the fastest man on skates. He was born on skates. And Walt Harris was the announcer for roller derby, which was always taped at the Keys Arc Pavilion. Golden Gate Park. I got these things embedded in my brain. I couldn't
Right.
tell what I had for breakfast.
Sure.
But from the Kezar Pavilion, Golden Gate Park in the city of San Francisco, it's the roller game. It's a roller derby of the week. This week, the San Francisco Bay Bombers against the Midwest Pioneers. Hello, I'm Walt Harris. Walt Harris also worked for Roy Shire and did the San Francisco wrestling. So there was absolutely an association. Same with the Olympic Auditorium,
Mm-hmm.
the LA T-Birds. Just when they were drawing those big houses with Blassie and John Tolis and Roddy Piper later on, the roller derby was hot.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I don't know what happened either.
well,
It was so hot, and then one day, gone. Right?
yes, and I think and they brought it back. I'm talking about in the 2000s with this flat track girls roller derby.
Right.
But you needed. I think one of the problems was you had to be really good to work the bank track, and
Yeah.
it took a lot of practice. So,
Well, before the pandemic,
go ahead.
there were these roller derby leagues all over the country, and they were all women. And from what I understand, it was legit. I mean, they used old roller derby rules. They had funny, they give themselves a stage thing like all beef patty or something like that.
Right.
But the actual action was legit. They just loved getting out there and hammering each other with elbows while they're skating.
But were they on the bank track?
No, it was they were doing it anywhere there was a big enough floor. There wasn't even a bank track. And it was always low end stuff, and it would always cost you like $2 to get in. And people who liked it loved it. And that died with the pandemic too. I don't hear about it at all anymore.
Bob, nothing's as good as it used to be.
No, it's true. Shoot. Well, I'm just happy I'm old enough to still be here and have these memories of these type of things,
I am. And listen, I just want to say it's really a pleasure getting to talk to you. I appreciate you giving an old guy like me a platform to spew out some thoughts and better than to drag up these memories and these names. I mean, who's talking about Joe McHugh? Who's talking about Guy Galante?
Guy Galante, right.
Who's talking about Walt Harris or Charlie O'Connell?
Lee Wong.
Or Lee Wong.
Lee Wong from Hong Kong.
Right, and sometimes Chinatown.
Sometimes Chinatown, right.
Well, I thank you very, very much.
Well, listen, thank you. You know something, the fact that you would even, like I said at the last time, someone of your stature to even want to come on this show. I know, seriously, I admire you. I admire what you've done. And what I like best about you is you don't seem to have a lot of regrets, which I love. Is that true? You seem to have been proud of your spot. You enjoyed yourself, and you look back on it with fondness rather than any kind of bitterness.
What am I going to do? Be sour? Yes, would I have liked to have been in Texas on Friday at ringside like I would have been in 2021?
Mm-hmm.
Of course I would have. But nothing is, it's just like, wouldn't you love that PWI was red hot and you were still editing? Things change. But
do you know why I left PWI?
No, I don't.
This is just as simple. They got bought out by a company called Stanley Weston, sold it to a company called Kappa Publishing in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I couldn't go. That's all it was. I had just bought property in Long Island. I was a young man, married. I couldn't lift up that route. I couldn't move there. It just didn't make financial sense at that point. So I didn't quit. I didn't get fired. It was just this circumstance. You got to remember in 92, 93, no cell phones, no computers.
Right.
We used a word processing system that wasn't even a computer back then. It was meant for just word processing. So unless you were in an office, you couldn't have a job like that. and I couldn't be in that office. I wasn't about to move, so I had to leave. It wasn't even my choice, and it wasn't their choice to let me go.
That's all right.
It was one of those oddball things. I always refer to it as kind of a cosmic screwing. But you know what? If that's the worst thing that ever happens to me, I had a good life.
Absolutely. Same with me. Look, I don't want to speak for you, but I will for a sentence or two. We had these great years, these great experiences, and we're still having them. And it's evident from tonight.
And I'll tell you something. You know what? It's a lift in my shoe, and I hope it is for you too. People remember us. I spent 6 years with PWI, and when I left, I put it in a drawer and forgot about it and moved on to a different thing. But I will be darned if I didn't go on John Rizzi's podcast for a year, and hundreds of people remembered me and were writing to me on Facebook and writing to me and here and there on social media. And they would post stuff that I wrote back in 89, 90, 91, 92, and they still do it. I don't know. I can't tell you what that means to me. Just that regular walking around people remember what I did and enjoyed it. That means everything to me. Screw the money, screw everything else. To me, the fact that we entertain people, that's a big deal.
Right. And you know what? You're still doing it. And I appreciate you including me in that.
Well, listen, you want to come back sometime soon? Would
Absolutely.
you like that? Folks, this is Cary Silkin. He's a legend, even if he doesn't want to fess up to it. He was the leader of Ring of Honor, and he's had so many experiences in the wrestling world. And I want to thank him one more time for being here, Cary.
Let's do a part 3, damn it.
Absolutely. You're one of a kind, man. I can't get this kind of information from anybody else. You knew who Lee Wong was.
Listen, thank you so much, my man.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, all that good stuff. Happy every day.
Al is quite a guy, isn't he? Really tremendous. A great conversation. And I hope you agree with that. Very few people know more about old school wrestling than Cary Silkin. In any event, there's another episode under our belts here. I want to wish a happy new year to everybody out there once again. I hope everybody's having a good time of it so far in 2024. Hold on a sec. That's our theme song. It's performed by Brian Teo. Our email is outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Write to us about any quandary you may have or just express anything you'd like. I usually write back. I try to. So let's have a conversation. Our website, Outdated Wrestling Hour. Buzzsprout.com, which contains every single show we've ever done. All of last year's shows and all shows going forward. Every show. You can listen to them all there. There's some people who are a little app-phobic when it comes to podcasts. This is a great place to listen. Also there, you can read about the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, where for a nominal fee, you can perpetuate the ongoing existence of this particular old-timer podcast. Take part in the Zoom meetings, which we have periodically. You could even win a prize. So if that sounds enticing to you, please. OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com and learn about the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. I'm Bob Smith on Facebook. You can see me singing with BB King on the opening page of my area, or whatever they call it. Also on Twitter and Threads, but I don't spend a lot of time there. Facebook is my main jam these days. Is that how you say it, kids? It's my jam. In any event, we already have a bunch of really great shows coming up really soon, including, I'm going to hype this for a long time. You guys know I was the person who wrote the first 2 PWI 500 magazines, right? The first 2 of that now yearly listing of the best wrestlers. Well, Steve Generali and he's with the Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam podcast, which you can hear on the Arcadian Vanguard Network at your leisure, and by all means listen. Anyway, Steve and I have come up with the 1970s 100. A list of what we consider to be the most influential, popular, important wrestlers of the entire decade of the 1970s. And let me tell you, it was tough to wheedle it down to 100. There are so many stars back then. So I don't think anybody's done something like this before. Steve's a real expert. You know my background. This is one you're not going to want to miss. We haven't set a date for it yet, but I want to hype it because I'm real excited about it. We're working on it as we speak, and it feels like the old days when I sat down and did the PWI 500. So look for the 1970s 100 coming up. That show's going to be a blast. So anyway, I guess that's it for now. My name's Bob Smith. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour featuring me and Bob 20 minutes from now, our staff announcer. You heard the beginning of every show. I hope you find him funny. I hope you find this entertaining. And I hope I find you again next week at this very same spot. Until then, it is a new year. Let us all have peace, prosperity, love, and be safe. Please